Thank you, Chris. Very interesting examples from Scripture of sharing bad news and good news, clearly. Excellent. All right, friends. Let's take a little time for some questions, answers from Chris, interaction on these ideas, or those that Chris has shared in the previous 2 days, if you were here for those, on his theological insights. Raise your hand, I'll call on you. You can unmute your microphone and speak to us all. Yes, John.
Yeah, I'll just get us started. But yeah, Chris, I want to echo what you said. You know, I did research on my own city for 5 years, and when I started to share it, no one believed it. They were like, that's not true. I've never met a Somali. There's no Somalis in my city. And I said, well, I think there is, you know. And so I agree it can be discouraging doing the work and then no one gets it or whatever. And so I figured out it was on me to put it in different forms. Otherwise, they're not going to get it. So then I created a tour, and I've taken 28,000 people on tours of my city, and they don't say, no, there's no Somalis in my city anymore when they're drinking tea with Somalis. And so the form really does affect the audience. And I felt like Jeremiah for like 5 years, and then once they saw it with their own eyes or whatever, the form they got, they instantly wanted to do something. But without that, it was just numbers on a piece of paper. It didn't have any meaning to them. So I applaud you for this message, because I think the onus is on us, not just to do the research, but to put it in a meaningful form or multiple forms. And for many of us, that's not our strength. We want to put it in one form, a map or a chart, or like your graphic. And so this is why the community is important. We need to work together to put it in multiple forms.
And you took people to see for themselves. I was, as he began
Jesus
telling
said,
that story.
come and see, you know, come
yeah. As he began to say that story, I thought, well, he needs a Somali to come and shake the hand of the person talking, you know, but how do you do that? But then you devised this tour system. That's great. We need to really think outside the box sometimes, how to get people's attention and communicate effectively with them.
Yeah, thank you, Brother Chris. That's wonderful message with a clear understanding. Very great. I really appreciate, and I encouraged myself. Thank you for your great word. And I want to better understanding for me. You are quoted the 1 Corinthians chapter 14. And I want to ask can you explain about this verse number 2? Here is Paul is saying like this: who are speaking the tongues? The people were speaking with God. How can we understand this?
Okay. I wasn't really going to get into expounding the original meaning of the passage. I wanted to take out some of the principles that Paul was using about effective communication with those you hear. So, Isaac, I may have understanding about that. I don't really want to get into unpacking that in this audience. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, sir.
Daniel?
I appreciate very much what you were saying, Chris, about making sure we're communicating to our audience well. And I was going to share several years ago, one of my friends and supporters, I had him proofreading a research report I was writing. And he said, this is great, except nobody on the executive level is ever going to read this. I said, what do you mean? And he happened to be a retired CEO of a large corporation. And he explained to me what they do in business school about a 3-layered report where you write the first page is just a 1-page summary for the executives. The main body is for other people. And then you have a detailed appendices for the researchers that want to get into the details. And it transformed my communication because I realized, yeah, I want the decision makers to be able to interact with something succinct that'll get them excited about it, and then pass it on to the people who really are going to read through the weeds and do something with it. And so whether we're talking about that as a vehicle or other vehicles, learning that who are we trying to communicate with, and changing from researcher speak to something that speaks to them is very, very valuable. It's just learning to think through their perspective rather than ours. And I really appreciate you bringing that out.
Yes, that reminds me, early in my corporate life, I came across some reports from business consultancy or think tank, and I was really impressed by their technique, because each paragraph in the report began with a sentence in bold, which actually encapsulated really what the whole paragraph was saying. And I've since then, some of you will have experienced, who've had emails from me will have experienced this. I don't do this, but every email by any means. But if I have an important email that is going to a lot of people or is going to quite senior people, I will very often write in careful paragraphs, but at the top of each paragraph, put a title in capital letters, which is not just telling you what the subject of the paragraph is, but again, can be read. You can just read through all those sentences in capitals and get the basic meaning of the email. Because some people just don't have the time, or they won't take the time to read the whole email in detail. Dwayne.
Yes, in English, we have this phrase about blowing your own horn, tooting your own horn. And I was thinking, the watchman who blows the horn is not trying to elevate himself or promote himself. And I see so clearly in that passage, it's kind of a challenge to me, I hope to all of us, to publish as a responsibility, as a service to others. Is not about us. It's about the others.
Yes, we can easily get confused there internally, Dwayne. Many of us who work in information management, we're backroom people. We have an intuitive humility, and we sometimes we undervalue ourselves, but we certainly don't want to promote ourselves. We're not salespeople. We don't want to put ourselves forward. And yet there comes a time when we have to put the message forward, at least. And that often means allowing ourselves to take a higher profile than we are comfortable with. Stephanie?
On the theme of humility, under the direction of a teammate, Gordon Bonham, our global research team with OC International now has the practice of concluding every research report we do with what we call prayer recommendations. That is, we have looked at the data, we understand it in a certain way. The way we understand it may or may not be the best application for those who are the decision makers. And yet those observations merit being given voice. And so we look at the data, and at the end we say, you may want to pray in these ways. You may want to do a follow-up study on Y and Z, now that we've looked at X. You may want to implement this particular idea in this particular way. We don't state it as action that must be taken, but prayerful recommendation for intercession so that decision makers can use our conclusions in ways that are most appropriate for their context.
That's
so
great.
every global research team report now ends with prayer recommendations.
That's great. We not only have a responsibility to pray ourselves, but it's great if what we produce can encourage and stimulate prayer in others and direct communication with the Father.
Mhm.
Yeah, Dan, I mentioned that some large NGOs have a policy whereby research reports conclude with a kind of a response for those for whom they are delivered, in which the receiving audiences are basically given a degree of accountability to say what they plan to do, if anything, with the information that they receive. And I think it's nice to be able to kind of provide a prompt if delivering to a particular audience to encourage readers of research to say prayerfully, what do you plan to do in response to the information? Not necessarily directing them, but simply saying, research generally is useful when it gets some kind of response. And so, what response will you be giving to it?
Yeah, that says it well, Jim. Thank you.
Excellent idea.
Hmm.
One of the problems being an information worker that I find time and again is we don't know what's happened to our information once it's left us. If we can find techniques to get a little bit of feedback as to what people are doing or intend to do based on our information, I think that's a good idea.
Very good. Thank you, Chris, for that.